Thank you all for giving me a chance to come and talk to you today. I'm happy to share with you a little bit of information about what I've learned recently with some of the things that we see and things that we do, and I think you hopefully will find it interesting. A bit of background, I think as Morgan mentioned, I'm a repeat offender. I like to start early stage companies. I've done it far too frequently, I think, according to my wife anyways. And the latest one has done a lot in terms of tracking distribution and movement of content through social and other channels. So I think we also don't tend to publish reports. We don't speak about it very often. And I was speaking with Joe Mandesi one time about some of the things that we saw, and he was starting to jump up and down in his chair, and so they asked me to come and talk to you guys today here. But I thought I'd talk to you about, first of all, is this working? There we go. This amazing new social application, if you haven't heard of it before. And it's really an amazing tool if you haven't used it. You can send messages to anybody. You can choose who you want to send it to directly. You can build groups around it. You can get one person to single them out for a private message. You make sure you don't ever miss anything. Things don't flow by out of your feed. And it's available to anyone, anywhere, anytime, any country, any language. And it's really quite amazing. And I've been using it for a long time myself. In fact, with Tynt, we call email the original social network because it really is social. That's what it is. If you follow the popular media today, you would believe that the world revolves only around what they deem social, which means Twitter, Facebook, and other things which have social components to them. This is very true. It's important. We see how it works. But one of the things that's really unique in what we see at Tynt is we really get the skinny on what's under the hood and how things are moving. And so these are platforms you do need to be very aware of. As our previous speaker was just talking about, Lauren was saying, it's big, it's important, it's a unique way to reach your audience. But right now, email, as you guys know, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, is still a very, very critical component and will be for a long time. That story that Morgan was talking about, he showed me just a few minutes before I came on stage here, which was about email wheezing towards the grave, is just not the case. So we all know that email works very well. It works for a variety of reasons, and people are using it very extensively. The email social network, one of the big things, of course, is it's asynchronous. You don't have to be there in your email inbox all the time to make sure that you're getting the right messages. They will sit there, they will wait for you to come and get them when you're ready for it. And when you send things out to the people that you hope are going to read your emails, you get the same benefit. It doesn't just flow by in a stream, and if they're not logged in, they miss it. Email is a lot more personal. If you think about the Facebook and the Twitter platforms, I consider them broadcast platforms. People put stuff out there because they're broadcasting it to an audience that they have. Whereas with email, most of what comes into your inbox is tuned to you and can be very personal to you. When I send an email to somebody I work with, it's very specific to them about something I want to direct to them. It's very trackable. You get a lot of feedback about what goes out by email and how well it's working, what your open rates are, and so much more. Of course, infinitely flexible. Anyone, anywhere, anytime, point to point, anywhere in the globe, any language. Nobody needs to follow, friend, or somehow join to be part of this network. And another really unique thing I've noticed lately that's important is decentralized. You've read, certainly we've all probably experienced if you're using these social platforms, when Facebook decides to change a rule. And all of a sudden, the interface is totally different, and everybody's upset. Or all of a sudden, you're no longer allowed to track birthdays. They won't give you that in the API anymore. Or they decide that for some reason, they're going to change the rules on you. The nice thing about a decentralized network that nobody controls is the rules don't change. And when you look at the user bases of these platforms, they're very different. Right now, there's many studies on these different user bases as to what email actually is. I kind of like the Radicati report, which says there's about 2 billion unique users, representing about 2.9 billion email accounts. And these are active accounts. These are ones that people use regularly. On Facebook, you've got 800 million. I don't know how many are active. Facebook doesn't really tell us that. My dog has a Facebook account, so I don't know if you actually want to reach out to her. But it's always some subset of that. So whether it's 80%, 90%, I think Facebook's usability rate is probably quite high. Twitter, on the other hand, almost all the new follows that I get every day on Twitter are from a bot or from somebody in Russia trying to find love. So, if we estimate the active user base of Twitter at 150 to 175 million, according to Twitter themselves. So these are great platforms. They're growing, and I'm going to show you some unique things that we see about how these platforms are being used. But email still dominates. It is not wheezing towards a grave. So is that going to continue to be true? What's going to change? I'm going to show you a few insights here. But first of all, I think maybe it'd be helpful for you to understand how we get our data at Tynt, because it's a bit different from the way most people get their data. We have a tool that we provide to publishers. And our publishers include guys like Hearst, Time Warner, Condé Nast, News Corp, Gannett, McClatchy, American Media, Financial Times, so on and so forth. So the majority of the Tier 1 media sites utilize Tynt to help them measure what people are copying and pasting from their websites. And we kind of fell backwards into this about 3 years ago when, I won't go into the whole story of how it came about, but we thought, no one's ever measured this, no one's ever written a report on it. Is it a pervasive behavior? Does it happen much? It happens a lot. And so what we do now is when somebody copies, we give a publisher complete analytics on what's being copied, where it's going, how it's being used as it moves around the web. And what we do is when somebody pastes content, so if you go to Sports Illustrated or the San Francisco Chronicle online, and you copy from one of their stories and you stick it into an email, we automatically append a link that says read more with a link to where it came from. That link also has a unique tracking code embedded in it. O'Reilly wrote a story about this technique that we put to use here, and they called URLs are the new cookies. So it doesn't use a redirect, it goes direct to the page, but it is trackable by us. And every one of these URLs has a unique tracking code associated with it that we also tag to your cookie. So this tool allows us to see what people are sharing. And just out of curiosity, one of the questions I often get was, well, what about those button bars that you see on the pages that say, share on Facebook or email? We measured, and people copy and paste 50 times more frequently than they push those buttons. And they're still sharing it through Facebook, they're still sharing it on Twitter, but they do it because they are habituated to grab what they want, copy it, stick it where they want it to go. So right now, interestingly enough, 6% of all page loads on the web result in somebody copying either a picture, content, or the address or the URL out of the address bar. 6%. It's a huge, huge number. And initially we thought that a lot of these copies are just going to be about Britney Spears or Lady Gaga, or something like that. And out of curiosity, we dug in and did some tests to say, what about brands? If we were to go out and query how often is Microsoft being copied and pasted in a single day, it's over 30,000 times we saw people copying information about Microsoft and sticking it in other places. I think Nike was about 9,000 times a day. People were copying and pasting the Nike brand. So we thought, well, that's interesting. Can we actually measure engagement of a brand, what people are choosing to grab and share and move around? And this was just a quick view of right now. Let's look at automotive for a second. We all know that Ford is very active online. What's interesting is we can actually measure that that's actually causing user engagement. They're actually grabbing information about Ford, and they're sharing it socially. More so than Honda, although Honda's number 2, Toyota's number 3. GM doesn't register. I don't say Hyundai up there or Kia. So our data that we actually keep trying to find different new signals in what we're seeing. But we do see a variety of things. Oh, I missed this. I jumped ahead. The reason I fell onto Joe's radar, Joe Mandesi's radar, was a study came out in January. And this independent third party went out and began to try to measure who was gathering the most information on users on the web. And everything we do is anonymous. It's all non-PII. We don't track anything that knows who you are, but we do track a lot of people. And they ranked the 300 companies that are trying to amass information about users out there. And in the top 10, you found the usual suspects: Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Microsoft, AOL, and Tynt. And so that's when I got a call from Joe Mandesi saying, who the hell are you guys? And so MediaPost wrote a story on us, and they called us the biggest company no one's ever heard of. We've always been quite happy to be the guys under the hood, behind the scenes. In fact, most of my startups, I've been the guy that's underneath, the person behind the curtain. But we are one of the largest data sources on the web. What we actually see are what brings you to a page. So if we're running on a travel site, and you visit a travel site, you've gone out and you've searched in Google for a Caribbean cruise. You land on a travel site, and we can see that what keywords brought you to that travel site. and we attach that to your anonymous profile. Then while you're on the site, we see that you consume content about Barbados and shark diving, and we add that to your anonymous profile. Then you choose to copy something, perhaps a little bit about travel insurance. You're going to send something to your spouse saying, do you think we need to buy this travel insurance? And you're going to send that by email. We track that. And then you decide to post something on Facebook. Hey, I'm looking forward to going ziplining when I'm in Barbados. We track that. And so we know all of these things associated with you. And right now, we see everybody in the US, and we see half of the people online globally. We track over 23 billion page views every month, 33 billion events, and on average, we see you 27 times a month. So this gives you an idea where our data comes from. And one of the things that we can actually see that very few people can measure is what goes out by email. Because normally, if you're sharing information about the travel insurance you're going to buy, the trip you want to take, the shoes you're thinking of, you ask your girlfriend to say, hey, do you think these shoes look good? You're going to send it by email. That's not trackable. You're not going to broadcast it on Twitter or Facebook necessarily. And we see that. So about a year and a half ago, before I do that slide, about a year and a half ago, TechCrunch put a story up. And this story, was called Facebook is the Lord of sharing on the web, or something along those lines. And it said that 49% of all sharing happens on Facebook. And I scratched my head and thought, that doesn't sound right. So I dug into where the source of their data was from. And it's from a little company that has a widget that goes on websites. This widget they had was on 5,000 small websites. And I thought, that just doesn't seem like a representative sample to me. So I had our guys dig into our data and say, where does sharing occur? How big is Facebook when it comes to sharing? And this was a year and a half ago, March of 2010. And we found this, that 73% of sharing 18 months ago was happening on email. 25% was happening on Facebook. It's a very big, very relevant, important number. 2% was happening on Twitter. That was 0.2% was happening on Dig at the time. And these were the 4 major sources of traffic 18 months ago. And so I actually wrote a post and said, sorry, TechCrunch, you got it wrong. That got some pickup and didn't make McLarrington very happy. But I said, we're following 500,000 websites. We see most of the big media sites, and we see what we believe is how people are really engaging. And Facebook is on a tear, but email's still where it's at. So when I got asked to come talk to you folks today, I thought, I'm going to go rerun that query for today and see how things have changed. And literally 4 days ago, I reran the stats to put into this slide. And you guys are going to see something that shocked me. And this is the first time anybody's ever seen this publicly other than the guy that sat next to my desk and said, holy, this is the change in 18 months. So Facebook now represents 69% of the sharing, and email represents 27%. Dig disappeared, by the way, in case you care. Now, it's all, and Dig was replaced by Reddit. But this initially sounds ominous. This sounds like Facebook is cannibalizing email. So I decided we needed to dig deeper. We needed to understand exactly what was going on. And the good news is, don't panic. That's actually not what's happening, even though that's what the stats make it look like. What's going on overall is that sharing as a whole has gone up massively in 18 months. And if you look at the blue lines, that was the data from 18 months ago. So in fact, sharing via email has gone up by roughly a little over 20% in the 18 months. So email is continuing to grow. It's just that Facebook grew faster, much faster. But when you get the user base of email, the volume being shared, people are still sharing there. But so you don't need to be, or you shouldn't be trying to say, well, we've got to stop what we're doing in email and shift it all to Facebook. Just recognize that 2 of them are very important together. And if you actually look at the effectiveness of the channel, email is still number 1. This is the number of links that were shared. So the first, this here was the number of links that went outbound. These are the visitors that returned through those links. So every time somebody shares something or via email, it actually draws more people back to the original content than Facebook does. We call this the link amplification ratio. And the link amplification ratio, pardon me, of email is almost 3 to 1. where the link amplification ratio of Facebook links is 1.1 to 1. So when you get somebody to share something about your product or your service or your stories on email, and they choose to send it out to somebody, those people are much more likely to click on the link and follow it back. In fact, there are third-party studies which say there's an 80% increased likelihood that if a link is sent on email, it's going to be clicked on than any other means. Now, this is a bit of an anomaly. Normally, we were tracking Twitter's link amplification ratio at about 3.5 to 4 to 1. When I reran the stats a few days ago, it had jumped to almost 7 to 1. I think it's an anomaly. I think it'll settle back down in that 3.5 to 4 range. And I was quite surprised because in my Twitter feed, there's all these links flowing by all the time. I don't click on most of them. But apparently, it's a fairly effective channel. But I also think that it's also a very concentrated channel. There are a smaller number of people using Twitter very heavily, and a large number of people that are still not. So I think as my theory, yet to be proven, is that as Twitter grows its user base, you will see that link amplification ratio come down to a more normal level. But I'm going to keep watching that to see what happens with it. So right now, so there's a combination here of Tynt data and some other third-party data. But some polls were done, and 75% of people are basically highly likely to share things they find online, which is an interesting change. That number continues to grow as more people engage. Our numbers actually suggest it's closer to 86% of people who like to share content online. About half of people share content at least once a week. I'm going to guess from who we are in this room, we're probably heavy sharers. We're more heavy than the average person out there, but on average, users of the web share content once a week. Right now, in the 18 to 34 age group, it's about even. They share about half on Facebook and about half on email. And this is a very important age group, because this is the age group that a few years ago, people were saying weren't going to use email at all. That everything was going to be Facebook for them, or everything was going to be some form of social for them. And right now, they're balanced. Anybody over 35, email is dominant. There isn't a lot of data for people under 18 right now, but if I'm going to look anecdotally at it, and I look at my kids, I have 3 daughters, and the oldest one's 14, and they are texters, they're Facebookers, not really Twitterers. But the thing that's interesting is as my oldest daughter has gotten older, she realizes that Facebook is a very public channel, and she's began using email for her more personal communications with her friends. And she also uses email now because that's where her basketball coach tells her when practices are. That's how the school communicates with her. And I see her email usage going up when I observe what she does. And I think that's only going to continue. So there was this fear that as people moved along, as this generation that said they're never going to use email, as they're growing up, they are using email. And they use it because it is a different use case than what Facebook is. And so that kind of dives into that each channel is tuned to a purpose. I said earlier that I think of Facebook and Twitter as being broadcast platforms. If I look at my usage of these platforms, Facebook is where my friends and family are. That's where I put the photos from our last trip. That's where I keep my relatives up, and I have a lot of relatives. So it's easier to keep them all posted on Facebook than having to do it some other way. Twitter's for business for me, primarily. I find interesting stories related to what I do, what interests me in my line of work, and I post it on Twitter. And the people that I follow on Twitter are also more related to my line of work, not so much my brother or my, well, I do, he's in the same line of work as me, but other people, like my dad's not even on Twitter, but I probably wouldn't follow him anyways on Twitter. Now, email, though, I use a lot more because of how I can control the granularity of who receives what and where I can send it. And so for me, email is the workhorse. It's where most of it happens. Facebook and Twitter, fantastic ways to keep my family in the loop, to raise my profile as a guru of something. in Twitter, I don't know what something is yet. And this is a bit of a fine print slide, but this came from CMB. And this was a study that they did that helped to break out by age group and by gender, how did you use the different platforms? And email continues to dominate. So I definitely do not see in our data email being cannibalized by Facebook or going away. But it does help to highlight that you can't just ignore one channel or the other. You need to be very aware and working with both. Another interesting piece of data that I found was Eventbrite, the online ticket sales guys, did a study to see how much, when somebody actually came through a link and bought a ticket on Eventbrite, what did that actually mean in terms of revenue So what was the average revenue per click for these different channels? And it does help you to focus on which channels are going to be most important for you. And for them, Facebook was a great channel, $2.52. But almost the same value was email. So if somebody's attending a concert and they email it out to somebody, there's a good chance that somebody on the other end of that email is going to return that and come back and buy a ticket for that concert as well. But Facebook worked really well for them because if you think about it, your friends and family, and I don't know about them, but your friends might want to come with you to this concert. So you put it on Facebook, good chance they might come along too. Whereas LinkedIn was number 3. Thought that was interesting. I think it's because a lot of business events are done on Eventbrite too, not just rock concerts. But Twitter was one of the worst. And there was a parallel study which somebody knit together. It said they believe one of the reasons Eventbrite had these results is that you have, on average, you have physically met in person 88% of the people that you've friended on Facebook. Whereas the people that follow you or connect to you on Twitter, you've generally met less than half of them in person. So that suggests that in that relationship situation or for a concert, that's one of the reasons why Facebook performs really well. But email, right up there too. So I'm hoping that there may be, just in addition to some interesting information, there may be some takeaways that you can take from this as we go too. So I want to talk a bit about some of the unique things that we've done with copy-paste data, and maybe they'd be relevant to you. But a lot of our people that use Tynt right now are major publishers. We've started to see a lot of growth lately in brand websites, people starting to deploy Tynt on brand websites. And that's because they still want to show up in search results. And one of the big things that Tynt, our publisher base, found that Tynt did for them was all those links that are getting generated by people paste. Sometimes they paste into forums, blogs, and other things. Those links ended up backlinking to your content, and it boosted SEO. In fact, one day I had a phone call from, this is how we got into News Corp. I had a phone call from the New York Post, and they said, you know, we've noticed that our SEO ranking, or our page rank is dropping relative to our peers in the New York market. We've noticed that all of our publications we compete with are running Tynt. And so we think you guys may have something to do with that. Can you come in and see us? So I dropped in to visit them, and they said, so yeah, our page rank's going down, our volume from search is going down. So if we deploy Tynt, how does it work? And then how long does it take effect? And I said, well, Google doesn't tell us how long it takes them to update their algorithm, but what we've seen is usually about 3 weeks. So they deployed Tynt that afternoon, and in 3 weeks, their page rank is back up with their peers again, because they're turning your readers into your link builders out there. So everybody can do this. Everybody can benefit from this. If you have content, I guarantee people are engaging with it. And they're engaging with it not just to share. It's another interesting point. We see 3 reasons why people copy content, primarily. One is they want to preserve it for themselves. So they visit a travel website, a recipe website, a coupon website, and they copy it, and they stick it into a Word document or somewhere else because they want to save it for themselves for later. That's one of the primary uses. A use we didn't expect when we first started doing this, it was really interesting. They use it to initiate a new search. So they're reading your story. They're reading something on your site, and they read about, in fact, a good example is that this is a true situation with the San Francisco Chronicle. They wrote a story about Google, and in it they referenced Marissa Mayer. And people didn't know who she was. And they just assumed everybody would know who Marissa Mayer was. And people were copying and pasting her name. And we could tell they were pasting it into the Google search box, at which point they were jumping off of the gate and going off to Google search results page. So they then wrote another story about Marissa Mayer and hyperlinked it to keep people on the page. The third reason people copy is to share. And this allows you to learn what your visitors are looking for. So we do provide to you interfaces that tell you what people are copying to leave your page for. So you can either give them more information or do a better job of providing it. And another interesting thing is we don't run ad campaigns ourselves. We've helped others to run campaigns. And a very good example is with this health food company. And they came to us to do what they called interest-based targeting. They gave us a set of keywords that they wanted to use to go find a new audience with. And we ran these keywords for them. They ran it through a DSP, but we provided the people that had the interest in these keywords that they gave to us. And the campaign performed okay. Not great, but okay. And we said, well, maybe these keywords aren't any good. How do you know what your users want? Well, we just figured these are the topics they probably are interested in. So let's run Tynt on your site, and let's see what they're interested in. And so we took the readers who were coming to their website, and we built up a different set of keywords based on what they were copying and pasting. And we ran another campaign using those keywords, and it performed 300 times better, or 300% better than the other campaign. It blew the doors off, which when in display advertising, it was a display campaign, to go from a 0.05 response rate to a 0.15 response rate is a pretty big difference. So you can learn a lot about what your readers actually care about. So I know we're running on a clock here, so I'm going to try to wind it down. But some key takeaways then. Email is not wheezing towards the grave. All the evidence we have is that it is continuing to be very strong. It's continuing to grow. Overall, email user base is growing by 10% a year. And when you're growing on a 2 billion user, 2.9 billion account user base at 10%, that's pretty strong growth. Facebook and Twitter can grow by these leaps and bounds because it's easy to start small and make big gains. But we're already seeing Facebook starting to taper off now in their growth. They're not adding 200 million users a month anymore. You know, they've been at 800 million now for a while. They're growing slowly. Twitter will hit that curve where it's going to peak out somewhere too. I don't know where it is. But that email at 10% year-over-year growth, that's fantastic. But email isn't different from social. You have to make sure that it's part of the same strategy. It's a different use case. The reason why you want to reach out to people on Facebook and how is different from you're going to reach out to them on email. Learn more about your audience and keep doing what you're doing because it's the right thing to do. So I think, Morgan, that's my time. I'm happy to take questions if there is time.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions? Right over here.
Bradford Johnson, Overstock. Do you find any seasonality in the use of Facebook versus email in terms of sharing? I'd imagine that this time of year, there's people might be posting a lot of deals for friends that are broadcast generally rather than selectively chosen sort of granularity of email.
So what we've seen right now is that when one channel dips, they all dip, which is interesting. We see, in fact, the very first year we put this out there, we started this company in Canada, so I'm going to give a bit of context here. And we were running along happily, watching things get busier and growing, then all of a sudden, user copy-paste rates just dropped off a cliff. And it was down for about 4 or 5 days, and we were starting to think, what happened? Is something wrong with our systems? What's going on? It was Thanksgiving in the United States. and people stopped sharing they just stopped being online. They were with their families, they were doing other things, and then right after Thanksgiving, it popped back up again. And then we had Christmas, and it dropped. And so we've seen that, now we've been doing this for 3 years. We've seen the exact same usage pattern change. But we have not seen a significant difference between whether Facebook doesn't drop and email does. It tends to be they all go down together, they all go up together.
All right. One more?
Hi, Heather Blank with Responses. Do you have any sense of the difference in content that's being shared on the different channels? So, I mean, I would imagine that there's certain things that are shared via Facebook instead of email, and so any sort of commentary on that?
Yeah. Now, we haven't done a lot of deep analysis on that, but we did some what I call superficial analysis by looking at some of our big sites. When I look at how Sports Illustrated is being shared versus the Financial Times, you definitely see a big difference. So business information is more often shared, we find, on email. Well, email tends to be used for almost everything, but you will find a much higher sharing rate among sports and celebrity gossip sites through social channels, for example. Whereas business, financial information is more email-centric for sure.
Where does the marketing content fit in there, like from the marketer or the promotional content?
Let me just, you want to repeat that?
Oh, sorry. Where does the, like any sense of where promotional content fits in there?
So if I was going to, I don't know if I can categorize or separate out promotional content, but when we did look at the brands, at least, the brands were, it depends on which brand, but we found that things like Microsoft and such tended to be, there's a lot of social spread, so being on Twitter and the like. In fact, we found a lot of the copying and pasting of Microsoft content was keys of how to deactivate your software when we dug into it. But the other brands, a lot of it was email. People were copying and pasting into email the crash test safety ratings of a Honda minivan and these types of things. So they were, the automotive sector was more email centric.
Derek, thank you very, very much for sharing all of that information with us.